Well, we're ready to start the show, so I'm going to run the intro, and if I can get quiet on set.
The following program was made possible thanks to the generous support of our Kickstarter backers.
Well, first Holmes was born, then he got fat, bald, and tired.
Sup, Holmes?
Beware, your host, Jonathan Hull.
Thank you so much, Sinistar. Dan Adelman, we have you for an hour and a half. I don't want to say anything this entire episode. Your brain is you don't know this, but your brain is a database of some of the most interesting information that's ever happened in video games ever. And we have you on the show. You've worked for Microsoft on Xbox. You've worked for Nintendo on their eShops for their indie games and also, you know, smaller games in general. You've done so much stuff already, and now you've split off into your own world. Is that right? You're doing your own thing now?
I am all by my lonesome at this point. It's very weird because I've spent the last, 13 years or so at really big companies, so it's a completely different world.
Yeah. And it's just been about a month, is that right?
No, it's been 2 weeks.
Wow. How does that feel? You must feel like a newlywed married to yourself.
Yeah, well, it's been overwhelming is probably the best adjective for it, because like I announced it, I think it was August 4th, whatever that first Monday in August was, because August 1st was my last day at Nintendo, and so I just kind of let things kind of stay quiet for the weekend. And actually, so you knew about it. A few, yes, yeah. So that was the big secret. So a couple people knew that I was actually. Some people knew before I told Nintendo. You being one of them, and so so yes. So I'm glad. Thank you for like kind of getting this on the schedule in advance. And so yeah, it was this. You know, basically, I wasn't sure if anyone would care. It's just some guy leaving his job to go out on his own, and so I put together a press release and then someone who I hadn't told, Jason Schreier from Kotaku, found out about it over the weekend, and he said, "I'm going to run this story that you're leaving Nintendo. Would you like to comment on it?" And I was like, "Man, I was planning on launching my website on Monday and tweeting my first tweet about it and putting out a press release, and so I was like, can you instead of just kind of leaking it out over the weekend, can we do something bigger like an interview and have that go out on Monday?" So that did, and it turned out to be a really, really good interview, and I was blown away by how much it got picked up. Like on NeoGAF, there was like a 9-page thread about me, and it was just the weirdest thing to like read. Like, why do people even know who I am? So it was.
Yes, you were a huge news story for that week, and it was really exciting for me to see because I've been really excited about what you're going to do next since I first heard you were leaving Nintendo. But I was also really concerned for you because I'm overly emotional and like protective of people I sort of know, but don't we don't hang out every day. But I still was feeling like, oh, they're going to say bad things, they're going to say weird things. Dan's going to feel totally out of control about how people are interpreting this huge move he's making in his own professional life is going to be seen as like video game celebrity gossip. Basically, people are going to say, "Oh, did he leave because he was gagged by Nintendo, or did Nintendo fire him for his controversial statements?" And I, knowing you as much as I do, I got the feeling that was going to be pretty weird for you. How was that to see you turn into this kind of hot button symbolic character? People who don't even own Nintendo consoles see you and see Nintendo as very important, and you're leaving Nintendo is very emblematic of something going on at that company in general. What was that like?
Yeah, it was surreal. So like I think everyone who has like a day job at a big company kind of has this feeling like, oh, I'm underappreciated. People don't really know what I do around here. And then and so like they're gonna regret it if I ever leave. They're gonna be lost without me. That kind of thing. And then like it was the weirdest thing, like to have all of the internet back you up on that, and like to say, man, Nintendo is screwed because Dan left, and it's like, I'm not sure that's the case, but it was awesome. It was really gratifying to have people say, like, that was one guy holding the whole company together, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but
Well, out of all of the people who have been public, people who work at Nintendo have been public, people like you and some of the people who worked with you, like Shannon Gregory, have been the ones I've seen kind of get embraced the most by people who play video games, whether they play Nintendo consoles or not. When they hear you, they think, oh, this guy gets it. He is one of us, and that's one of Nintendo's major PR problems right now, is people don't feel like Nintendo is one of them. It feels like Nintendo is of a different generation, of a different set of priorities, so it's just kind of an anti-cool turnoff a lot of times. But you were like the Nintendo cool guy, and then people were so excited to say Nintendo lost their cool guy, they're doing even worse. And there you were sitting there wanting to think, well, I'm not mad at Nintendo per se, but at the same time, thank you? Is that more or less the attitude you're at?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I never really thought of myself as being particularly cool. I've always been kind of like the nerdy guy. So for anyone to think of me as cool is just odd. but I guess within this community, I fit in. So it's it's kind of like, at long last, I found my community, and this was like probably 10 years ago that I kind of found this community, and people have really responded because I gel well with them and they gel well with me, and yeah, I think Nintendo is very much a traditional company, and so like the PR strategy was always about like, let's put out a message, let's have our talking points, let's have our bullet points, here are the key phrases, and just kind of keep to the script. And and you can kind of tell, like, and the people who work on the PR team understand that. They know, like, this is the PR angle, and a lot of them were very encouraging, saying like, it would be nice to have like one guy kind of going off the reservation and just kind of giving a more informal response to some of these questions, and not necessarily speaking for the company, but being one of the people who work at the company. And so so it was interesting. I think a lot of people thought it was like all of Nintendo thinking one way and I was thinking a different way, and that wasn't the case. There's always, like in any situation, there's a lot of gray.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that before you were as well known as you are now, I would often say to people who were speaking of Nintendo with blanket terms like, oh, Nintendo doesn't care about indies, or oh, Nintendo doesn't want certain games on the console. I'd be like, well, Nintendo is a big place, and I've talked to some people at Nintendo who think just like you about this, but it's not so much one organism, but a giant amorphous blob that's constantly changing all the time, and you made some really big strides there. What are some of the things?
I hope so.
Yeah, I think so. I saw things change. I think a lot of people saw things change for Nintendo when it came to indie games in particular, in a huge way, going from DSiWare to the 3DS eShop, going from WiiWare to what we have now on the Wii U. I don't think we would have had a Shovel Knight on the Wii exactly. We did have World of Goo, but then from there things really kind of...
We had Cave Story, we had And Yet It Moves, we had Nick's Quest, we Swords and Soldiers. We had actually a lot of good stuff. A lot of people. There was one of my favorite things was one of the weekly sales or something on Steam was a bunch of games like the Bit Trip series. I think was also one of the big ones from WiiWare days. And so Steam put together a bundle that had, I think, World of Goo, Nick's Quest, Bit Trip Runner, one or two others, and one of the articles called it the WiiWare bundle where you can actually find it, which which was like, there were these great games, but the user interface was so terrible. Like, I had developers who are, computer savvy people, like they make games, so they know their way around a console, and they wanted to buy their friend's game, so they had motivation, they knew about the game, they knew exactly what they wanted to buy, and they were motivated to do it because they wanted to support their friend, and they struggled to get through the process and just kind of gave up in frustration. So many of the problems, I think, for WiiWare, it was actually a really cool repository for indie games, but the user interface was just really hard to get through.
Yeah.
So that was one of the challenges with WiiWare that was addressed a lot better in the 3DS and Wii U eShop.
Sure. What are some of the things you feel most proud of looking back that you accomplished, bringing Nintendo? Really, you were there, if I understand correctly, pretty much when Nintendo started any sort of digital distribution at all. How do you feel about that looking back?
I'm really proud of it. I'm especially proud of like what the focus of those eShops has become, because I think the very beginning when I started, there was already work underway for Virtual Console. So I don't want to take credit for Virtual Console because there was this great classic library of games that and they were already planning on doing that. And then the question was like, well, if we've got this digital distribution system, should we allow new games to be on it? And if so, what games should be on there? And I think back then, especially, this is like 2005 or 2006, the only games that were released via digital distribution were casual games. And like it's like all like card games and match 3 games and basically puzzle games, hidden object games, that kind of thing. And one of the things that I really pushed was, I said, that shouldn't be the focus. The focus should be, we've got this wacky new console which has motion controls, and no one knows what to do with them. And the large publishers, there's just too much risk for them to place a big bet on some brand new game mechanic. So, let's embrace creativity and let's let that be the focus, and let's try to do everything we can to highlight games that are doing something new and different, and whether that's new uses of the Wii remote controller, or if it was just innovations in game design. Like that's what it was really about. There's so much inherent risk in the retail model because you have to spend all this money mass producing discs and shipping them to warehouses and getting them to retailers, and they stay up on shelf for like a month or two, and then they get moved to the bargain bin, and so if it doesn't do well, there's so much upfront cost, and that's why I was thinking, like, with digital distribution, you can afford to take a lot more risk in the game design itself because you don't have these other costs associated with it. So that was the thing that I kept hammering home, and fortunately a lot of the other, the rest of the organization either didn't care, and so like, yeah, go ahead, run with it, or they were supportive. So either way, that got to be the focus of it.
Huh. So do you think you can imagine somebody else in your position? Could you see somebody saying, yeah, let's just get Bejeweled on there, and like that's it, and what would have happened then? Do you think that if you weren't there, is it possible that would have happened?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's all but guaranteed.
You saved us from a WiiWare filled with Bejeweled clones. Thank you so much. Well, if it weren't for, and did you negotiate with Gaijin Games, now Choice Provisions, on the Bit Trip series and the World of Goo guys and all of these games that for me really shaped WiiWare as a service that I got pretty attached to quickly? First of all, I freaking love the music. I still do. I just boot it up every once in a while to listen to it. And it seemed to me to be the place where the most risk was happening because I just got the feeling that the overall focus of the Wii wasn't so much about budget of the games. It was about, like you said, trying new things. And that's why I like so many retail Wii games as well, though they often didn't sell as much as I had hoped they would. So there's so much. I'm trying to pare it down to just one question at a time because on one end, want to ask you why you think third parties didn't sell as well on the Wii as Nintendo did, or as maybe they would have hoped. And also, well, I'll just start with that one. All right, one at a time.
Okay, so where are we starting? We're starting with third-party games.
I can't do it. I was asking, why do you think third parties on the Wii specifically didn't do as well as they wanted to, at least according to what they've told us?
So are you talking retail or digital distribution?
Yeah, we'll go with retail. A little bit out of, because you're not only someone who's an expert on your specific job at Nintendo, but an expert on video games and Nintendo in general. So just to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think it was let's see how best of it was kind of like this negative spiral in that a lot of third-party publishers viewed the Wii consumer as this casual audience that really wasn't very sophisticated about video games, and so they would dumb down their content or just put out a lot of shovelware. And this also happened on WiiWare as well. Unfortunately, it was probably 80 to 90% shovelware, unfortunately. And I kind of knew that would happen because both for the retail side as well as digital distribution, we don't have a concept approval process. So as long as it meets certain guidelines, we have some categories of things that aren't allowed specifically, like advert games and things like that. But other than that, if your game was crap, you were still allowed to do it. It was your investment, and so people just had this mental image of like, oh well, my sister-in-law, she has a Wii and she doesn't know what she's doing, so let's give her some really crappy stuff and they'll just buy it. And in the early days, I think people did buy it, unfortunately, and then over time it just became more and more crap, and so the only one who was really investing, and so it became this self-fulfilling prophecy, like people would put out crap, it wouldn't sell, and then everyone said, well, third-party games don't sell well. And meanwhile, Nintendo was making really good games like, Super Mario Galaxy and typical Nintendo first-party games. And so, of course, if you're given the choice between Super Mario Galaxy and Grease the game, which are you going to choose?
How are they going to be able to get over this curse? Because I feel like it's stuck with them into the 3DS somewhat, into the Wii U severely. People just associate, well, if it's a third-party game on a Nintendo console, don't buy it. It's just like, I remember growing up, people said, oh, art programs are just better on Macs. And I'm like, what if it's the exact same program? They're like, nope, always better on Macs.
Yeah,
like, okay, but that's just kind of having these hard and fast absolute rules makes people feel safe when they're making a big, expensive purchase like a video game. So, anything that makes it less scary for them, they're usually going to lab onto and believe. Now Nintendo's stuck with it. Third-party support on the Wii U is pretty abysmal. Do you think there's any way out of it for them?
Well, I think Wii U has another challenge, which is that the install base, it's no secret, the install base isn't where everyone was hoping it would be by this point. So, and that's, like publishers usually, that's like the first thing they'll take a look at is like, well, what's the addressable market? And if they see that, it's relatively small, then it just doesn't seem like that attractive an opportunity. And so I think that's also playing into it right now. I think, though, there's a lot of really good Nintendo first-party games that are coming out, or that have come out, like Mario Kart 8 and a bunch of Smash Brothers is coming out later. And so I think those will drive the install base quite a bit. Also, Sony and Microsoft, they've got a lot of promise, but so far, in terms of the overall game library, it's still relatively small, but it's going to be catching up pretty quickly. So there's a window right now where, I would have to say of the three consoles, Nintendo has the best library right now. So as the install base grows, there's a bit of a lag because, by the time a publisher looks at the install base and says, oh, this is actually now looking like a potentially interesting opportunity, then, it takes another 2 or 3 years before they can, start churning out games for it. And so it's not like they can just turn on a dime, which is unfortunate. Another challenge is that the Wii U, because it has a different hardware spec than Sony and Microsoft's PS4 and Xbox One, which are very compatible in terms of like their relative power. A lot of times a third-party publisher is going to have to make a very separate SKU specifically for the Wii U and 3DS, and so they have to make a decision like, do I want to put a whole other team on this? Whereas, for PS4 and Xbox One, they can generally use one team to do both SKUs. So it adds a little bit of cost, and if you've got, if your install base isn't great, then it becomes a really tough sell about why do you have to spend more money to go after a relatively small install base. But hopefully the install base will pick up and it'll turn around, because I'm a fan of the console, despite, I think some of the headlines when I mentioned, I'd say like 99% positive things and then one negative, and of course the one negative, and granted, sometimes I use charged vocabulary, like I called the name of the Wii U abysmal, and of course, that's just like headline ready. So, but despite all of that, I'm actually a big fan of the console, and I use it all the time.
Yeah, so do I. My old idea was for the Wii U, before it was known as the Wii U. I think it might have been known as Project Cafe, but maybe not even that. I thought they should just call it Frank.
Frank, that's an interesting...
Because everyone's like, I love Frank. Let me be Frank. Could have been an awesome catchphrase, but I'm probably terrible at these things. But when it comes to games, though, like PS3 360 games, like Ultra Street Fighter 4, Metal Gear Solid 5, GTA 5, there's all these games that are more or less in the Wii U wheelhouse in terms of power, and third parties still aren't putting them on there. Do you think that's just because of install base or personal feelings or stigma or any number of those combinations together?
Well, I think it's a combination of cost. I think also that anyone who wants some of those games, like the AAA games from the previous generation, they probably already have the previous generation, so they've got the 360 version or the PS3 version. So doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to port that over now to the Wii U, and at least, given the install base numbers, if it was kind of like, wow, a whole new group of consumers are now going out and buying a Wii U and they never had a 360 or a PS3, then it could make a lot of sense.
Sure.
But I think a lot of the people who might be buying, say, the next Madden or Need for Speed or, Assassin's Creed or whatever, if they're going to buy the last generation version of it, then they'll just buy it on those consoles.
Sure. My thought was that the Wii U has had some droughts in terms of retail games, and third parties could have scooped right in there with a Ultra Street Fighter 4 port. There's a lot of people who like fighting games in general, excited about Smash Brothers. Maybe they would have tried Street Fighter for the first time if they were Nintendo loyalists, but it just didn't seem like that stuff was happening. It seemed like, I don't know, and this is a larger topic of, as someone on the outside looking in, it is so easy for me to apply personal feelings about this. I mean, I don't know how many times you've heard people say, well, Nintendo doesn't love us anymore because they haven't put out Mother 3, or third parties hate Nintendo because, the N64 days or something. Was it that personally charged, do you feel like, on the inside when these decisions were being made, or was it mostly just solid business decisions, cold, not personal?
It was very much solid business decisions, cold, not personal, because like a lot of the third-party publishers would tell Nintendo, we really want you to succeed. We love having a vibrant, competition among the three platforms. Nobody wants any one platform to become so powerful that they can dictate all the terms to all the other publishers. So publishers benefit by having a vibrant, console install base, and but they don't want to foot the bill for that. Like it's not like they could say like, well, we'll invest like we'll spend $10-20 million making a game specifically for the Wii U, knowing full well that we probably will lose money on that. They just can't justify it to their shareholders, which is why I think some of the indie games on there are perfect for filling that gap and filling that void, at least until the Wii U install base starts turning around, and then it becomes a more attractive platform for third-party publishers, and then they can start, and like I said, there's a bit of a lag. So during that time, I'm biased anyway because most of the games I play these days are indie games. It's been a long time, I think, since I've actually played and really like sat down and beat a retail game. I think like the last one that I really invested a ton of time in was probably Skyrim. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So for you, to dial it back to something you mentioned earlier, that there wasn't so much a content curation process. You could make a terrible game and Nintendo wouldn't say no, but you were able to kind of steer things as well as you could. It sounds like you put an effort into steering things towards quality games. And did you think, well, third parties aren't supporting this as much at retail? That like gives games like Shovel Knight and 1001 Spikes and Scram Kitty and His Buddy on Rails and It'll Do
Sure.
and all these games. And that gives my side of things an opportunity to maybe get the spotlight a little bit more.
Yeah. So so I think like I said, anyone can bring a game over, and the way I try to approach like working with indie developers in general is not so much like going out and getting the next. Like a lot of people will like reach out to me and say like, oh, there's this awesome game on Steam, you should get it for Wii U, or they saw something really cool at IndieCade and they say that would be perfect for Wii U. You should go get it. And usually, what I do, and what I aim to do anyway, is let those developers know about what the opportunity is realistically, and then support them as they're going through the process. So, if I tell a developer, hey, I really like this game personally. If you were to bring it to the Wii U, I'd see what I could do in terms of showcasing it at our events and kind of highlighting it in our messaging. But here's kind of what the process would be, and here's what it would entail, and let me know if you're interested. And so really kind of putting the choice back on the developer rather than kind of selling the developer, because the worst case, the worst thing that would happen is, a lot of indie developers just don't have a lot of resources, and so if I convince them like with this big sales pitch of like, oh, you make all kinds of money and it'll be great, and and then they do it, and then if they're not successful, then I feel like crap. And so what I try to do is like, let me give you all the information you need. I'm here to give you advice, and if you decide not to make your game for our platform, no hard feelings on my side. I want my first priority is really to help the developers and make sure that they live to see another day. So I would never want to steer someone into a bad decision. But then the ones who do decide to come over, and we tried to make things easier with like Unity being free on our system. So if anyone is working on a game for Unity, that break-even point for them is going to be much lower. The amount of time that they'll have to invest in supporting Wii U is much smaller. Still not zero, but it's not as easy as like file save as Wii U build. But it's much easier than building a game from scratch.
Right.
Where was I going with this?
You did great. But to dial it a little, did you do something to try to steer things in the direction you wanted it to go? Like, did you have a vision for what kind of games would fit for Wii U, and therefore, if somebody came to you and said, I want to develop for Wii U, of course you wouldn't say no, but did you make an effort to try to get particular people on that platform?
Yeah, I tried to. I always have this preference for highly experimental games. That's stuff that I personally really like, and so I'll kind of make a point to reach out and try to get those kind of games, even if they might not sell. I think a lot of the developers who make those games don't do it with the mindset of, I want to become a multi-millionaire, so I'm gonna, like look at the Bit Trip series. It, looks like Pong with a music soundtrack, and that was, of course, everyone wants to make a decent living making games, but they also want to make something that they themselves would really want to play. So the ones that I would kind of actively reach out to are the ones that were doing something a little bit more experimental and kind of risky from a design perspective. So there's some that hopefully will be coming. One is a game called 6180 The Moon. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Yeah, it's black and white. It's like a black and white obstacle course, like flying through the air. What is going on here game?
Yeah, it's a weird game. Very I like interesting game mechanics. That's kind of like my personal thing, is like trying to come up with new ways of what games can be and what games are. So that was one that just was really interesting. There's all kinds of interesting games that are coming out. So like It'll Do was kind of like this spoof on Zelda, and that was kind of interesting. And Runner 2 was one that, you know, I was such a fan of Bit Trip Runner in the first place, and that was before like runners became like this genre unto themselves, and a lot of that I think started with the success of Cannibal, and then there became all these clones. But you know, I think Bit Trip Runner predated Cannibal, but don't quote me on that.
Actually, I have a quick story about that.
Oh yeah,
Quick.
okay.
I was at PAX East. Can't remember the year, 2009 maybe, and I was playing Bit Trip Runner. It wasn't done yet. So excited about it, and I was trying to get other people to play it, and they're like, "I'm playing Cannibal right now. I don't need that." I'm like, what a thing is like a thing you like. You can like both things.
Yes,
I said,
exactly.
No, I'm not playing a Wii game. Blah blah blah. There was so much. I was Nintendo's. I was Detoid's Nintendo guy. Felt like anyway for a while.
Yeah.
Not because I was ever given that job, just because that's what I was. Well, first of all, there was a hole in it because so many people at Detoid at the time were like, well, we don't want to write about Nintendo games. We want to write about the games that are seen as more hardcore, more cool, blah, blah, blah. Why don't you review Wii Fit? I'm like, okay, sure. So there was a hole for it. And also it's where my passion was because, like you're saying, a lot of strange experimental games on there. Like I think I mentioned before, when I played World of Goo, on WiiWare, I was like, this is a store where things like this can happen. They're not happening on the other stores. And things were different then. People might forget that the digital space wasn't this huge place that it was now. It was a lot more sparse. Steam wasn't as big then either. People didn't think, oh, I download new interesting video games. They think, well, I look for them at retail. That's what I've always done. And slowly that bus has been turned, but it's been a slow process, which you did a lot to make that bus turn around.
Thank
you, son of a gun.
I'll take all the credit, sure. Yeah, so the indie movement is all about me. No, I think, you know, I sometimes think about, like, I definitely, before indie games were a big thing, you know, I kind of found out about them, like, kind of, you know, I was actively looking, this is before WiiWare launched, like, for things other than, you know, the casual space, because, like, that seemed at the time like all that there was. And so I spent a lot of time, like, talking to casual game developers and saying, you know, there's now all these opportunities, take advantage of it. And it was kind of like opening the jail cell and saying, okay, prisoners, you're all free. And they just stayed there. And it was like, come on, run free, go, enjoy your freedom. And they wouldn't. And so I was like, damn, nobody's doing anything. And then that's how I kind of found, I think probably the first, like, true indie game that I kind of found and invited over to the platform was World of Goo. And I think I found out about that because I was Googling experimental gameplay is what I was looking for, and Kyle Gabler had a website called experimentalgameplay.com, and so I was, like, browsing through all the different I don't know if you're familiar with the site. It was basically a game jam website. Like, once a month they would pick a theme, and they would, you know, the rules were that you could only work on your game for about a week, and then you put up whatever it is, and, you know, whatever the theme was. And so Tower of Goo was one of those games, and, like, I looked through all the different prototypes on there, the different snippets of gameplay, and, like, all the best ones were by this guy named Kyle Gabler. And so I got in touch with him, and through him, Ron Carmel, and so that's where that started. And I found out later, and, like, instantly, as soon as I saw the game, I was like, oh, this is going to be amazing. I was able to play it, you know, probably about 6 months, maybe even a year before it launched, like, just different snippets of it. And I heard later, after it was this big success, that Ron and Kyle told me, like, they pitched it to publishers. They were looking for funding, and nobody was interested. And that blew me away. I was like, how could they not be interested? So I think, you know, from the mainstream industry side, I do think I was probably one of the first. I think it might have happened on its own anyway, because, you know, Steam would have gotten better, and there was already a community of indie devs who were out there making this really cool stuff, and I think the market just really grabbed onto it in the same way that I did. I was just there probably a couple of years before it became this thing. So so I'm kind of like this indie games hipster that I was into it before it was cool. So yeah, that's my claim to fame.
Not only into
I
it,
called it.
but making it your job and making an actual difference, taking risks with your own well-being. If all the games that you push to have on Wii U, Wii, all of these eShops, if they had all bombed, I'd assume your career would have been in trouble. But you were at Nintendo for quite some time. Do you think it's because you did? I'd love to get a breakdown percentage-wise, but this is an impossible question, so feel free to answer it a different way. But do you think that you stayed at Nintendo and did so well at Nintendo? What percentage of it was because people just weren't paying attention? And what percentage of it was because you feel like you met the expectations of your bosses, and how much of it was because you felt like there wasn't anybody else who would want to do it or be able to do it, that it was your passion that kept you there? I wonder if you could break that down. That's a tough question.
Yeah, I would probably say about 95% of it was nobody paying attention to what I was doing. So it was, so I mean, the Wii was doing really, really well, and the one area that wasn't doing well was WiiWare, unfortunately. So like the sales numbers on WiiWare were relatively low. World of Goo did very well on it, but that was kind of an outlier. There were a bunch of other games that sold okay, but not great. Probably not enough to justify creating a game from scratch for the Wii, but for a port it might do well. You could definitely earn your money back and get some profit by porting to WiiWare, but and then towards the end, it was just abysmal. It was just not doing well. But the company overall was doing really, really well. The Wii was doing great. The DS was doing great. And so I was kind of left to my own device. This was kind of like this experimental area that was almost off the books, and people just let me do my own thing. So it was really a core team of like 3 or 4 of us, and we ran the entire process, and we released the games, and I'd go out and work with the developers, and then we would just we had this very efficient or somewhat efficient process. It was all done manually because there were no really good systems for it, but we just churned out all these games. So I think it worked out really well, but I think had the rest of the organization been a little bit more on board, it would have been great to be plugged into a lot more of the marketing initiatives, and if we could have had like a TV campaign, or best yet, just an overhaul of the UI. There were so many things I wanted to do from like a merchandising perspective of like, I don't know if you remember from the Wii Shop days, but all of it was the merchandise, or the layout of that shop was all based solely on whether it was a new release or if it was a top seller. So if you were not either of those, your game was impossible to find. It was like, here are the top 5 newest games, here are the top 5 top sellers, and that was it. And so the top sellers stayed top sellers because it was like, oh, here's a game I can find. And so that was basically why games stayed there.
I think there was like a year of my life when I was so excited about so many WiiWare games coming out. I think the Bit Trip series was still going. Yep. People are trying new things with it still. And I'd look to see what's the top seller this week. It's Frogger. I was like, Frogger? I mean, I still have a Frogger t-shirt when I'm not a Frogger hater. However, I
forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like a year of Frogger. And it said to me that there was something desperately and I assumed people were buying the Frogger, but they were buying Frogger instead of all these other things that were really interesting. Oh, it was a sad time. And you were sitting there too, I assume, thinking like, Frogger again.
So there were the Frogger years, yep. And the interesting thing was, like, in the early days, like when World of Goo launched, number 2 right behind it was My Aquarium, which was by Hudson, and it was basically a screensaver. So
For $5, right?
it was a $5 screensaver, and so week after week, every week, look at the numbers, and sure enough, World of Goo #1, which was good, and then right behind it, my aquarium, and so Kyle Gabler was saying like one of the reasons I think he created Little Inferno later was he wanted to make a game called My Fireplace, just to make fun of my aquarium because it was like always right behind his game, and so that was the impetus of like, let's start with the name of a game, My Fireplace, and then let's see if we can actually make a game that wouldn't, sounds like it would suck, but actually doesn't suck. And so
which is on the Wii U as we speak. It was one of the
Exactly.
first Wii U games I got when I was checking out the Wii U eShop.
Yeah.
So, you've left your position at Nintendo willfully in the hands of a successor. What are you hoping happens for your successor and for Nintendo from here? Because it was 8-9 years you were there.
I was there. Had I stayed, my 9-year anniversary would have been in November. So
wow.
It was like 8 years and 9 months.
So for me, when I'm in a place for that long, the idea that it's a job slowly goes away, and it really turns into a relationship with the organization in general, and you can't help but want things for it and want things for the people there. I assume that happened to you too. When you left, what were you hoping to see happen for everybody?
Well, I think it's kind of the rest of the organization. So kind of like what I mentioned before about like 95% of what I was able to do was because nobody was paying attention before. Now everyone's kind of gotten it in their mind like, oh, digital distribution's this big thing. We've got to pay attention now. And so in some ways it helped, but in some ways it felt like I was given a smaller piece of it to manage. So it used to be like I was in charge of basically the entire program, soup to nuts, because there was no one else doing it, and it was like I mentioned, a team of 4 of us, and you mentioned Shannon Gregory, she was one of those, and so we just did everything, and now there's like these other organizations that are involved, and I was kind of moved into this larger team, and they were all great people on that team, nothing bad or negative to say about that, but it was kind of like, well, let's take all the pieces that you used to own and kind of split it up, and like the operations piece will go to the operations team, the marketing stuff will go to the marketing team, and and you can focus just on meeting with developers, which was great, but the downside of that was that if a developer got stuck or needed something to happen, in the old days, I used to be able to say, well, I'm going to get that unstuck for you. I will, do blocking and tackling and make sure that any obstacles that are in your way, I'll remove those. And now, towards the end, more and more, it was like, well, let me let the operations team know that you're getting stuck. It's not my place anymore to unstuck that for you. And so, there's a mix. There's some people who are very passionate about this stuff, and then there are people who are more used to the, traditional business, and that's kind of what their routine is all about. And so I think my successor, and I've already given to Nintendo a couple of names, and if they pick anyone on my list, I'm going to be really happy, and I'll know like they're going to be, set up in a really good position. I don't want to jinx anybody's candidacy by mentioning their name, because that might work either for or against them. So, but yeah, I hope they'll just kind of continue doing what it was I was doing, like getting, making sure that I think the most important thing that developers need to know is that somebody is there to help them. And so rather than like going out and bringing in new content and new games, it's really more just letting them know, like, if you bring your game, you're not just going to be thrown on a pile with a bunch of other games and like left to fend for yourself. It's someone's there who knows about your game, understands kind of what you're going through as an indie developer, and has a sympathy towards that mindset, that and they'll take good care of them. That's really my hope.
Yeah, it's something, as I've met a lot of indie developers over the years, so much more about the personal relationship. Like, they will sometimes make a game I know people who are making Ouya games just because they like Keely Santiago. They're like,
Yeah.
she's so nice, I'll put a game on there.
Yeah,
And
right.
that's why they're like making indie games instead of trying to make millions in the AAA industry. They could do that if they wanted, but they're like, this is about doing something with your life that has meaning, and that has to do with what product you make, and also. Oh, I knocked over my squirt gun for my dog. And you were that guy. I used to follow. I wasn't like stalking you exactly.
Okay,
That's
good to
probably
know.
not quite the right word, but I would go around at PAX and events and just catch up with developers. I remember Phil Tibetowski of Octodad was one, and I was like, "So, have you met Dan Adelman? Has he been by?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, he was a heck of a guy." I'm like, "Do you think anything will work out?" They're like, "Who knows?" I mean, they don't want to tell me because the press and whatnot, more risky too than not. But
Sure.
I was checking to see what you were doing. And you were doing great. Everyone I talked to, yeah, they had all at least seen your face and saw that you were looking to make a connection. But I felt always worried about Nintendo's chances of winning over indie developers because Sony seemed to just be giving them money. So it was like, here's
it would have been nice to have money. That would have been nice. I wish I had all that money. Because yeah, developers like money.
They need
generally,
it. They want meaning and relationships and blah, but they gotta eat.
They gotta eat, absolutely, right. And and they, they don't want to have to go back to like get a day job somewhere. They want to be able. A lot of them, have very modest expectations. They're like, I don't mind having roommates and working with, with my friends alongside me, and I can keep to a really tight budget, but but they want to be able to make a game that will sell well enough that they can have a reasonable, quality of life, which I don't think is much to ask for. So, and I think that personal connection and understanding of where they're coming from is important because, like, a lot of times when I'll talk to a developer, like, one of my first questions is always like, how are you holding up? Are you doing okay? Because a lot of them, they'll be working on their own, for months at a time without leaving their house, isolated from, friends and family, and there's so many stories out there about people battling with depression, and fortunately people are becoming more and more open about it, but like the stress of putting all of your hopes and dreams into one game, which is this big passion project, and you're isolated from the world, and that there's a really good chance that you're not going to make any money, and you're burning through all your savings, and it's a tough position to be in. And so sometimes, like, I would be having conversations inside Nintendo and saying, all right, I really want to help this developer out, can we include them in our marketing? In this big next marketing push, I'd like to see if we can, get some more exposure for this game. And, a lot of times the response will be like, well, they're releasing on Sony first, so I'm not sure we want to include it. And be like, come on, really? And or the response would be like, if they really cared, they would make sure that they would ship it on our system at the same time. It's clearly not a priority for them, so it's not a priority for us. And I'd have to remind them, like, it's one guy, and people are so used to the idea that you have this massive team and you just allocate a few people to make sure that the different system versions are running in parallel. But if it's like one guy, very few people can sim ship on multiple consoles, and so resetting people's expectations and educating people internally was a lot of what I spent some time doing, just to make sure that people understood, like, how important some of these things were to someone. Like, for us, if we dropped the ball and put the wrong price in the eShop, or forgot to release their game on the day it was supposed to release, we're like, oh, oops, sorry, dropped the ball, we'll pick that up. And meanwhile, there's this guy who's slaved away on his game for like 4 years, and it's like, I've told everyone that my game is coming out at 9 a.m. and it's not there, and it's like, yeah, I was up at 11. And it's like, all that stuff matters, and it's so personal to the developers that, and it's fatiguing on both sides, like, to always be thinking like everything is an utmost priority. And if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. It's hard to be full on all the time. Everything is a big priority, but you kind of have to be, because to each developer, they don't care that, every week you're releasing new games. They care about, their game, as they should. And so that was a big challenge, and continues to be a challenge of like making sure the rest of the organization understands and kind of has an empathy to where a lot of the indie devs are coming from.
Huh. It was an ambassador job in a lot of ways, is what you're describing.
Yeah.
In between the peasants and the kings.
Yeah.
That's strong. Or being. I was also having flashes of you dressed as Batman while you were talking, because
I don't think you want to. Yeah, that's not a good image. Just like a me and spandex. Just no. It's
well, at least just the cowl,
Yeah.
Well, because the Justice League. I don't know if you're familiar with them. Superhero team.
Yeah.
All got amazing powers and strengths, and they've forgotten oftentimes what it's like to just be a human being. And then Batman shows up and is like, Superman, if you lift that guy's house and throw it, he's going to have to build another house. Don't do it. And he's like, what do you mean? Everyone just has an ice cave, right? And like, no, right. Human beings, remember, but they don't.
Well, Bruce Wayne could just buy him a new house, right?
Well, that's okay.
I don't see it.
You couldn't just buy them a new house, but you
no.
Like you were the people who are having to say to corporate Nintendo, there's a different world out there, and in order to interact with this world where you could end up making a lot of money, get a lot of positive PR, because indie games today are making millions, multi-millions.
The best games are, in my opinion, the best games out there. Like if you were to take, forgetting about price and everything, just the best pure games are the indie games. So yeah, it was like, the Office requirement was one that made a lot of press. That for a long time we required that developers work at an office outside of their home, and a lot of times the argument that I would hear from people who were defending that policy was like, well, if they're really serious about making games, then shouldn't be that big of an expense for them to go get an office. And it's like, yeah, it kind of is. They they don't want to get up every morning, shower, shave, put on a tie, and go to the office like in the 50s. It's like they live their game, so it's they're working on it until late at night. That's the first thing they do in the morning. That a lot of people will have a schedule of work until 4 a.m. and then sleep until 2 p.m. and
Sure.
it's just not the same routine as like EA or Activision have.
Well, it was people who chose indie games because they didn't want to work in an office, and then Nintendo was saying, you can only do it if you work in an office. It was really, opposite day for them. And I remember a lot of people, I think I talked to Phil Fish about it at one point, back when Fez was still in production. I remember him saying, like, I just feel like Nintendo would try to hurt me, so I'm going to go the other way. I'm like, no, they're nice. But his passion was so deep into Fez, he couldn't dare take any risks at that point. He just barely survived that whole process. So any extra risks at that point. Yeah, I wonder how he's doing. He's back on Twitter talking.
I saw that. Yeah, he's big on Ferguson.
As he should be.
Yeah, as he should, as everyone should be. But that's I just noticed in my Twitter feed, like, oh, Phil is really hammering that home. That's good for him. It's great to care about things outside of your own world. So
that's kind of Phil Fish in a nutshell, caring passionately. So maybe a real interviewer would ask a question like, what are 3 things that you were still frustrated with in terms of policy, in terms of having your hands tied when you're on your way out at Nintendo, thinking, well, I'm not going to miss this part of the job because this has been very, very difficult?
I would have liked, let's see, 3 things. All right, one would have been nice for me to have my own content budget. That would have been nice to go around and say, like, here, I like your game, I like the cut of your jib. I'm going to invest in your game, help you bring it over and justify it, just to make sure that you're going to break even or better on your game, and have the rest of the organization understand that it's okay if that budget doesn't make money. Like if that pool of money, if we don't recoup that, it's an investment in this community and developing the community and building goodwill and bringing great games to the platform. And you place 10 bets, 9 won't pan out, but 1 might explode. And so would have been nice to have a little bit more of that flexibility. More control personally for me over the layout of the eShop. That was handled by another team. So if you go into the eShop and you see kind of what's being promoted at any given time, that wasn't me. That's kind of like what I was alluding to earlier, how like digital is a bigger deal now. So there are all these other organizations that started to come into play, and so there was one team that was set up that does the layout of the eShop, and sometimes my priorities aren't their priorities, and so that was another thing that I wish I had more direct control over. Let's see, trying to think of a third. I think the biggest one, and I don't think anyone at Nintendo even would dispute this, a lot of our processes were set up with the retail model in mind, and so it's very difficult, and a lot of it is, you're expecting a relatively modest number of games coming in, modest being, a couple hundred a year, versus like the tens of thousands that you would see on iOS or something like that. And so a lot of the processes were manual and kind of a little bit out of date. I know that Nintendo's making a lot of investments to automate processes, make it smoother, but I wish that process could be accelerated. But it's not easy to modernize your process, especially an existing process that people are using and depending on. If it could be built from scratch anew, I think it would be a very different system. But I think you have to kind of tack on to what you already have, which just makes it a lot harder to make that process that efficient.
Mm-hmm. And was there any chance you feel that you could have eventually been promoted up into Nintendo where you were able to make all of these decisions? Did you ever feel like if you just stuck it out, maybe you would end up, not quite being Reggie, but being up there one of those days?
I never got that impression. I'm really bad at corporate politics, so like if Reggie said something I disagreed with, there are a lot. The culture at Nintendo is very much like nod, say yes, say nice things, and then go off and do your own thing. And like people don't have confrontation's not a big thing, especially not so much with Reggie per se, but NCL, which is Nintendo Japan. A lot of people don't want to openly disagree. And so there would be meetings where someone from NCL would say, here's what we think we're going to be doing with digital distribution as a company. And then they would, room full of like 20 people, and they'd say, so does anyone think this won't work? And I'd be the only guy raising my hand saying, here's why that's a really bad idea. And so, there were times like there's one meeting in particular where that happened. Like I raised my hand, and my boss, who's looking out for my best interest, he was like always there trying to it's kind of like a toddler running through like this garbage dump of like trying to just shield me. So I really appreciate it, and so like he got a note down and handed it over to me. He's like, what are you going to say? And so I and I jotted back like, here are my points. And it's like, okay, you can say that. And so I wasn't very good at playing some of the corporate politics games. It's just not something that I'm interested in doing. So I think also Nintendo is a very hierarchical company, and a lot of people stay at Nintendo for a long time. Like 9 years in the games industry sounds like a long time, but at Nintendo it's actually, I wasn't quite the new guy anymore, but I wasn't like, there are people who are there like 25, 30 years even. So, and they would tell their war stories of like, I remember when Virtual Boy launched, and when we launched the first Game Boy, and And so like when I'd complain about the name Wii U, they're like, yeah, well, try Virtual Boy. The first time you try selling a Virtual Boy, like what the hell is that? And I was like, yeah, that's a really good point. Like at the time I didn't think much about it, but yeah, that's a terrible name.
Yeah, it's selling a fake boy, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, want to pretend you have a boy? Here you go. Yeah.
It's like, it's creepy, thinking about like I'm going to, or Game Boy for that matter. So
yeah, they are creepy. What do you think you would have named the Wii U if you had your?
God, I don't know. I remember for the Wii, the code name was Revolution, and I really liked that name. That was pretty badass. So something along those lines, I think would be kind of cool.
Do you think Wii 2 or Super Nintendo 2 would have been just as confusing?
I think Super Wii could have done well. A lot of people have thrown that name out there, and I kind of like that. It kind of goes back to the heritage of the Super NES and those days. So I think I kind of, if I had to vote, I wouldn't have hated Super Wii. I wasn't a fan of the name Wii in the first generation either. Of like, I remember the first time I heard the name Wii. It took me probably a year before I would call it the Wii. I kept calling it Revolution for like a good solid year before I was like, all right, this name is final. I got to live with it. And so a lot of people would point to the success of the Wii and say, see, it doesn't matter what it's named. And, and I kind of think it succeeded despite the name and not because of it. And so why put unnecessary hurdles in your path?
Yeah. My thought on the Wii U, and not just the name, but the console in general, is that it feels too safe for people, and it feels like trying to replicate past successes as opposed to boldly just giving something to people that is clearly made from passion and not necessarily made by following focus groups and whatnot. Like when the Wii came out, it was like, they've lost it. They gave up on the GameCube because it didn't sell as well. The GameCube was trying to be like other consoles, so the Wii, they're just like, they're going for broke, and people are like, who knows what they'll do? I'll buy that. And then it became a cultural phenomenon, and it took off from there, whereas the Wii U is like, remember the Wii guys? We're still doing it. Now it's kind of like an iPad too, huh? And I love the Wii U, like I said before, but in terms of marketability, it felt too safe, and safe Nintendo isn't what it becomes cultural phenomena, at least from what I can tell. Maybe, I hope I'm wrong. Smash Brothers is coming out pretty soon. Maybe it'll blow up and the Wii U will end up doing as well as everybody else, but I guess we'll see, huh? And I've been just, what time is it? Rats, I can't believe how fast this has gone. And we've only really talked about Nintendo. You worked at Microsoft as well. And how did you even get here? Can you tell us quickly a little bit about the career path? Sure. I personally would love to copy it and end up having your life somehow. It's probably a little too late for me, but how did you end up where you're at today?
Well, I got definitely a couple lucky breaks. So I guess it kind of started off like right after college. I moved to Japan. I lived in Japan for about 6 years, and I was a big gamer back then, but never really thought I would be able to work in the games industry. It barely crossed my mind. I don't know why, in retrospect, why I didn't, like, while I was living in Japan, why I didn't try to apply for jobs at Sega or Nintendo or any of the Capcom, Konami back in the day. I just kind of assumed like that nobody really works there. That's like, it didn't even cross my mind. And so I took, frankly, what I thought was a safe bet, and I went to business school, and then I got a job at Microsoft. And around the time that I joined Microsoft, Xbox was still heavily rumored but not yet confirmed, and so it was like in that stage, and like internally, people knew like it was actually happening, and so day one on my first job there, I just wanted to meet people who are working on Xbox and see if there was any way I could move onto that team. And so, and the irony is, like, despite all of my networking and trying to meet people over there and getting to know people, the way I got my first job was there was a job posting, and I on the internal career board, and so I just sent in my resume and interviewed for the job and got it. And I think the reason, though, that I was even considered for the job, because I I had no experience in the games business, was because of my background with Japanese. Because everyone knew like Japan's this big important market. There's like Square Enix. Actually, back then it was just Square. Enix wasn't part of it. And Capcom, Konami, and Sega was had just exited the console space, and so they're like, well, we need somebody who knows something about Japan. And so, so I was able to get my foot in the door that way, and it was great. The first few years of Xbox, it was like this crazy startup where you basically did whatever needed to be done. So like I started off doing contract stuff, like negotiating contracts with in conjunction with the legal team, working with publishers, and then there was this need for Xbox Live, and so thinking about the strategy for Xbox Live, and that's kind of how I got involved with Xbox Live Arcade, which was actually, I'd like to say like this was my idea, like we should do digital distribution, but it actually started from the Casual Games group on MSN, and they had like a casual games portal with Bejeweled and that kind of stuff, Zuma, and a lot of PopCap stuff actually, and they said, well, these are games and we should bring our games to Xbox. So and then that got approved, and so I kind of joined that team to like actually make it happen. And so so that was my first foray into digital distribution, and it was right around that time that I was just perfectly satisfied being around games. Like the fact that I could be in my office, just looking at video game sites, and like if my boss came in my office, I wouldn't feel like I have to minimize the screen or anything. I was like, awesome, and like I could talk in the hallways about video games and like talking about like what I was playing last night, and not feel like, all right, I'm the only guy who's playing video games. I thought that was really cool, and so so once I kind of got over that phase of like, wow, I'm really in the video game industry, then I started to think like, well, what do I want to do here? Now that I'm here, am I just going to be like a cog in the wheel and like just try to, facilitate and, just be yet another guy? Or, what do I want my, not to sound too cheesy about it, but, what's my legacy going to be? And,
Sure.
And so it was around that time that I was thinking like a lot of games seem boring these days. Like I felt like I was losing interest in games. And it sucked for me because I was like, I'm finally here. I'm finally working in the games industry. Now I don't enjoy games. I never finish the games anymore, and they're all kind of feeling a little dull. And so that's why I decided like that's what I want to see if I can do. If I can like kickstart innovation, for lack of a better term. And that's why when I went over to Nintendo, that's what I wanted to do.
Huh. And did you feel like kickstarting innovation at Xbox Live Arcade was more difficult than it might have been at Nintendo?
I think so. I don't think so. I wasn't really in charge of the content. It was really much more of like platform policies and kind of coordinating among all the different teams of like, all right, what are the certification costs going to be, and how can we run this program efficiently, and what's the the P&L going to look like? Very much a business focus to the role, not like what should the overall strategy be. That kind of came a little bit later in my career of like I was very much like a team player on Xbox Live Arcade, where I was like one of the guys thinking about one aspect of the overall business, not kind of leading like, here's what the 10-year vision of the business should be.
And do you feel like Nintendo saw what you were doing in Microsoft and thought, we want a Microsoft person to kind of Microsoft what we're doing on that side of things?
Nope. No, I don't think that was it at all. As cool as it would be to say, that's how it happened. No, it was just, a lot of the focus at Xbox was starting to be like, for 360, it was like, we're not all about games anymore. We're also about movies, and we're about music, and like, so a lot of the projects I was being asked to work on were kind of getting further and further removed from games, and I wanted to like move maybe onto Microsoft Game Studio so I could work on actual games as opposed to the console platform. and actually work with game developers. So I wanted to get closer to games, and I felt like I was getting further and further from it because of the focus. Like there's a lot of I was involved a lot in like Massive. If you remember that, it was like the in-game advertising initiative. It was acquired by Microsoft, and so I was like putting together the business model for in-game advertising, and I wasn't, I thought it was an interesting business model as a business person, but it wasn't games. I was learning more about like CPMs and all the different advertising metrics and things like that. And so I was kind of, the way it happened that I went over to Nintendo was I was kind of bored at work one day, and I was just kind of looking around, and I decided on a whim just to check out the job boards at Nintendo, because I knew that they were just trying to do something new and different with the Wii, and DS was starting to do a little bit better, and so I saw this job description that was directly working with game developers. This was actually, I was supposed to be doing what's called second-party deals, of like finding games that Nintendo would fund and publish. And so I started off in that, but it was basically describing my resume, the job description. It said, familiarity with online business models, knowledge of Japanese culture and ideally speaking Japanese, MBA preferred, experience in the games industry. And I was like, they're basically describing me, so I owe it at least to talk to them. And so I sent in my resume, and yeah, I don't think there were many expectations. In fact, I remember one of my first interview questions, they said, this was like towards the tail end of the original Xbox days, and the interview question I got was, so why do you think Xbox Live is a failure? And I was like, I'm not sure I agree with the premise of your question. I think there was like, at the time, it was like a 2 million subscriber base, each paying $50 a year. So it was like $100 million a year business, and everyone, Xbox was still clearly a second place behind PlayStation 2, but the one area where it clearly outshined everyone else was in Xbox Live. It was just this beautiful system that just worked really well, voice across all the games, and you could do matchmaking and find your friends no matter what they were playing. And I'd say like everything that shipped in that original iteration of Xbox Live, I think that's like 90% of everything that every console needs. Like if you could just have that, you'd have 90% of what you need. Like all the other, bells and whistles beyond that are nice to have, but just core getting those basics right is, it was amazing. And so I was kind of surprised. Like there was a big disconnect.
Who was that? Do you still know the person that asked you that?
I know the person. I'm not gonna say.
Do I know the person? I want to talk to this person. So.
Maybe I'll tell you offline.
I mean, there
are all kinds of crazy things. Like there's very much. I'm gonna get myself in trouble, but
you'll be okay.
There's nobody watches this show. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, you're right.
No, but there's very much a drinking of the Kool-Aid among certain people at Nintendo. There are people who just kind of are in their Nintendo bubble, which could be a little bit frustrating because there are many of us who were not part of that bubble and who could kind of see what was going on in the industry and the trends, and but there were other people who were like, blinders on and really didn't don't care to understand what else is going on. It was years before people noticed that there are still people inside Nintendo who don't know what Steam is. Granted, a lot of those people are not the ones making decisions about the digital distribution business and things like that. But to me, that just blows my mind that there are, first of all, that there are people out there who don't know what Steam is, let alone people who, at least even if they're not doing game stuff specifically as part of their job function, at least understand the landscape of what's going on in video games. So there's this very distinctive way of viewing the world in some pockets of Nintendo.
I can't picture being a higher up at like Burger King and not knowing Wendy's exists.
Yes,
I just get,
exactly.
You at least know you're interested enough, but I guess it's such a huge company that there are people whom, well, you see it. I don't know if you know anyone who has a government job, a state government job. You just get entrenched in that, and you're in your own little world, and you go through your routine, and that's the world is changing around you, but the state stays the same. And Nintendo, I mean, is there any company that's more established and proven to be able to survive than Nintendo? It can cause people, I'd imagine, to let the world pass them by as they just kind of do their day in, day out routine at work.
Yeah.
That sounds. And you weren't that guy, though. You were, and a lot of people assumed that you left Nintendo because they wouldn't let you go on Twitter. And I tried to put myself in your shoes and think, like, well, do I care about Twitter? I do care about my job.
Sorry, you're breaking up. I'm having trouble hearing.
Still?
Yep, it's. I hope there's not a bandwidth problem. Yeah, now you're breaking up. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, it sounds great.
All right, okay.
Microphones. How's that?
Still cannot use. Yeah, your image has frozen on my screen, so I'll just assume that you can hear me and everyone else can see you fine. So I'll just talk about like the Twitter thing. Oh wait, you're coming back into focus. I'll bet it was something on my side.
Maybe you can just do the questions. Can you see the questions?
No, yeah, you're coming back in, Holmes.
I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. Sunspots. Blame it on sunspots. Am I back enough?
I can hear you fine now.
Oh, okay. Is my image still frozen?
Nope.
No, you're fine. Move ahead.
What a weird mystery. Yes, let's do the Twitter thing, and then if that happens again, I don't know if you can see the lovely questions we have, and from the.
Cannot.
Well, we'll make sure they get to you. But yes, the Twitter thing. How did you feel about being asked to not tweet?
It was frustrating. I could understand a little bit why. So, my boss, the guy who was, kind of walking behind me, trying to like keep me guarded so that I wouldn't step on broken glass or anything. He was getting some pressure that every time I said something that was off script, people would come down on him, and he would just try to say, like, you're making waves that people are getting bothered by. You should just stay off of Twitter. And and I was saying, yeah, I understand. I screwed up. I shouldn't have said the thing I said about I think it was like region locking. And that was just one example. There was another one where I said that I was disappointed that Xbox wasn't allowing indies to self-publish, because I thought that was holding back the indie scene from developing. So that we at Nintendo, they try to avoid trash talking the competition. And I didn't mean it as trash talking, but there's because I was known as representing Nintendo, there was a valid concern that I shouldn't be doing those kinds of things. So and like I mentioned before, if I have this bad habit of not having a filter and just saying what I am thinking at any given moment, which is not ideal for a large corporation, especially a conservative one. So I did understand it, but also my argument back was, like, a lot of developers who don't feel comfortable sending me an email and like an official request will have no problem just tweeting at me and just saying, hey, take a look at this, let me know if I can get in touch. And I gave out my email address over Twitter a whole bunch of times for people who just wanted to see if like somebody would respond. And I said, we're kind of missing out on that, and I get that there's potential for downside that I might stick my foot in my mouth again. I'm not going to pretend that that will never happen again, but I think that downside is more than covered than the potential upside of just being accessible to the community. That was the argument I made, and the rest of the organization felt, you know what, just let's stay the course, just stay quiet, stay off of Twitter. And so it was frustrating. It's not a reason to quit my job, because the real reason I decided to leave Nintendo was, I've always wanted to start my own company and just see if I could, strike off on my own. I think everyone at some point has thought that on their own, of like, I want to just try to do something. And I did see a really big need among a lot of indie developers who, want really nothing more than just to make a decent living doing what they love, and making great games. And especially if, there are people who have a lot of passion and not a lot of talent, and they make a game and it doesn't do well, and that's a fact of life. Not everyone can make a game that's successful, but for people who make a really good game, they should have a fighting chance, at least, of being able to keep doing that and making more great games. And every once in a while someone will make a big mega hit, and be able just to live comfortably for the rest of their lives. But I think a lot of people just want to be able to do the business stuff well enough that they can keep going, and keep making games. And so that's kind of the need that I saw, is like, how, kind of like the first goal that I mentioned of like, how do we make it so that the games industry can allow for more innovation? That was kind of like the first thing that I said. I want my legacy to be helping that happen. And I think we're there. That there's clearly a mechanism, whether I did it or not, or whether I had a role in it or not, that exists. And so, checkbox next to that goal. But, the second goal of like, well, how do we make it, for lack of a better term, sustainable? How do we make it so that it's not like you either become Notch or you become, homeless?
Right.
There's got to be a middle ground between Notch and homelessness that, and I guess like Jonathan Blow is in that middle ground technically, but somewhere between Jonathan Blow then and
yeah, even
like,
sort of, I've got roommates. I still can't eat out every night, but I'm making a little. You're right.
Yeah.
I know people who do it strictly for the passion and aren't making very much money at all, and I know people who are pretty well off. Lambier immediately comes to mind. They
Sure.
had a huge hit with Ridiculous Fishing, and finding something lower middle class, I guess you could say, is a little bit harder to see right now.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the developers that I started working with like 9 years ago, they were like in their early 20s at the time, and now they're, pushing 30 or a little, going into their 30s, and it was fine for them in their 20s to live with roommates and kind of live like they were in a dorm. But a lot of them are now getting married, they want to have families, and they shouldn't be faced with the decision of, do I want to have a nice, comfortable life, with a family,
Sure.
or do I want to do what I love? And if they have sufficient talent to make a game that is really great, I want to help them understand like the best practices of what they need to do. That, granted, is not part of their passion. I understand, like, marketing their games and doing business stuff is not their passion, but hopefully, they can understand the basics of it to do well enough at it that they can just make it a sustainable lifestyle. And so I would like nothing more than if, like, if I have like my big goal for the next, indie games 2.0 would be that, publishers become less and less important, and that it really becomes a meritocracy, that if there's a great game, that it's discoverable and that people will find it, and that it's a viable decision to make that as a career path, instead of like, this is something that I'm only going to do because I'm passionate about it and I'm comfortable being a starving artist.
Sure. And that'll open up the field to people of all different socioeconomic backgrounds, all different ages, thinking this is something I can do, instead of this kind of, like you said, early 20s into late 30s, passionate, art-focused, I'm willing to sleep on couches, I'm willing to eat ramen noodles, and so many great games have come from those people, but so many more great games. So your business, is it a business? Is it a consulting? What would you describe what you're hoping to do, and does it have a name as well so people can start looking for it?
So the company name is just Dan Adelman LLC. So it's just I needed to put something on, to make it official and legal. But yeah, I guess it's kind of like a cross between like an advisory thing or a consulting thing, or the way I kind of think of it is like I will be the freelance business guy across multiple teams. So like, there are large stretches of the development process where you don't really need the business guy. The business guy isn't going to be doing that much. Like when everyone's just knee deep in development and coding and level design, you want the business guy to be informed of, here's the status, here's what's going on, here's like, what the most recent levels in the game are looking like, and so they should be informed. But there's not a whole lot to do. But other than staying informed. And then there are other periods where there's a lot to do, like putting together the marketing plan, reaching out to press, reaching out to the platforms, negotiating contracts. So in an ideal world, I would be able to kind of float across multiple indie teams, focusing where I need to, when I need to, like when things get really busy and they're getting closer and closer to launch and they need to engage more with press and they've got to kind of prepare for the launch, that'll be a busy time. Whereas another team, maybe it's just, they're still in the, early stages of development, and, at that point it's more about letting press know that this exists, kind of keeping everyone informed, less time intensive work. And so hopefully by kind of spreading myself across multiple projects, that'll be enough to keep me super busy. And also it'll be exactly enough for these developers. And another thing that I want to do is I'm hoping that I'll be able to kind of explain to them, to each of the developers, what they should be thinking about at each stage of development, kind of walking them through my thought process along the way, so that when they finally ship their game and hopefully it's successful, there is an element of luck involved as well, but hopefully if they're successful, they'll have all the relationships with the press and the platforms, and they'll kind of know about like how to think about going to market with their game, so that for their next game, nothing would please me more than them saying like, all right, we get it now, we know how to do all this, we don't need you anymore. And I'd be like, great, I will work on, move on to the next project and, and help somebody else. And I also want to memorialize some of these learnings so that people who don't want to spend money or give up a share of their game, that they'll just be able to kind of look at some of the resources that I can put together and just do it on their own. And that would be great as well. It would be great if I could put myself out of a job and I don't know then what like version 3.0 is, but I think there's always going to be plenty of need for developers who don't know about the business stuff and don't necessarily care about it.
At first it sounded like instead of being a publisher, you wanted to be like an agent or a manager, and I immediately think of that show Entourage, which I only kind of know, and I'm like, Dan is not an Entourage guy, but he could be this wonderful kind of ambassador as you've been before. You have all these connections, you still know people at Nintendo, I bet you still know people at Microsoft, you've met people at Sony, you probably know people, if you don't already, at Steam, but then the more you talked about it, you just kind of morphed into a dad. And you were like, I just want to see them grow up and have a great life, and then I'll be old and think it was wonderful. All my children are so strong and independent. I was like, he is Batman. You've gone from Batman that we know from most of the Batman stories to Batman beyond Batman, sitting in the chair, looking at the map, saying, I'm going to help you, Terry. You might not be a Batman fan, but he got old, Bruce Wayne, but he didn't give up.
I haven't read the comics recently, so yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's I'm thinking about Batman all the time, as you can tell. So this is a huge compliment. To be Batman begins Bruce Wayne is something I aspire to be, certainly. And I can't wait to help you. You're going to keep in this industry. I'm going to get to be able to tell you things, and you can tell me things, and we're still a big part of this community trying to make better video games happen as best we can without actually being able to make them. I just wish I could make one, but I'm terrible at those things.
Well, there's tools out there for learning how to do it, and I dabble in that as well, just more as a hobby than anything else, of like teaching myself Unity and C#, and just go through tutorials, and maybe not with the mindset that you're going to publish something or put it out there, but it's always good to like just mess around with that stuff and kind of see how how the sausage is made. It's fun.
You're fathering me right now.
I
Right
take
now,
your baby
you
steps. Your baby steps.
What kind of game would you? And I should get to these questions. Oh, rats!
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
technically out of time, but
Oh,
I did
man.
want to ask you what kind of game you would want to make. Maybe a quick answer on that.
I have all kinds of game ideas, things that I would like to make. Probably the most recent one that I've got in mind is kind of a Zelda-like game, like kind of adventure-style game, but more about some of my own personal experiences. But that's probably never going to happen. So, but
Sounds
yeah,
incredible though. An autobiographical adventure game. That sounds great.
if I were to make a game, that's what I would make. But right now, I'm kind of busy, so.
But people, people who make video games.
I do.
Never know when a team up might be approached.
Yeah.
So we'll get
definitely
to
open to that.
If you're okay.
one nice, oh yeah, I'm totally fine. But I was just gonna say, like, one of the nice things about being on my own now is, like, throughout the years, like, people would approach me with like small one-off business proposals, like to go off and do something, and you can never really do that if you're full-time employed at a large company like Nintendo. So now, like, it's worth just, if we want to like just try something for a couple months and there's like this quirky thing that's off, like not what I normally do, but interesting to try, totally could do that now, which is fun.
Awesome. That is so good. Like a second youth. You've hit the fountain of youth and you're back into that phase where you're one of the people. You went indie basically, which is amazing. Pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Speaking of indie, Devi
Yes.
Ever, one of my favorite up-and-coming indie developers, asks, my question is if you had any comment on high-profile yet, quotes, edgy games like Binding of Isaac not being allowed on a Nintendo system. Binding of Isaac, for people who don't know, Edmund McMillan is working with Nicholas on bringing out a version of consoles. There's been a lot of talk about, actually, I'll never forget the night. It was like midnight, sleep deprived as usual, and I heard, I can't remember how, that Binding of Isaac wouldn't come to the 3DS because it had religious content, and not thinking it out, I just wrote like an enraged news post on Destructoid, and then I felt really bad because Edmund is someone I know, and I didn't ask him for comment first, and he was kind of like, you could have asked me before you freaked out. I'm like, I'm sorry, Edmund, let's do a comment. I'm sorry, my emotions got the best of me. But so many people want Binding of Isaac on Nintendo consoles. What do you think of that?
I am a big Binding of Isaac fan, and I'm an even bigger Edmund McMillan fan, so and Nicholas fan. So I would love to see it happen. I'm kind of out of the loop on that one now because it's not my game. I'm not at Nicholas, and I'm not at Nintendo anymore, so I probably shouldn't comment on that. Other than to say, I would love to play it regardless of whatever platform it's on.
Yeah, me too. We can always hold out hope. Hope never hurts, I've noticed. Sometimes it leads to good things.
It does.
And before I forget, I know I'm going way over time. Thank you for staying late with us, Dan.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Do you want to name a few of the games? I know you probably don't want to pick favorites out of your adopted children, but were there some games that you both really wish you could have gotten on Nintendo consoles and games that you're really happy that you did manage to secure on Nintendo consoles?
Oh, sure. Let's see. So, kind of made the news. And I didn't expect it to, but I mentioned that Grim Fandango was one that I really wanted to bring to Nintendo platforms for years. So I'm glad that it's going to be out on Sony platforms. So that's one I'm really excited about. I'm really excited about what am I? Alakaloka's game. I'm blanking on the name of it.
Alakaloka.
Yeah, do you know Alec?
Yeah. I know Alec.
Night in the Woods, I think it's called.
Right. I never. I've always read his name. I follow him on Twitter, but I never actually said it out loud. Did he work on Towerfall a little bit as well?
He did. He did. I think the music for that one.
Yeah. That's right. I saw Towerfall doing really well on Nintendo consoles in my vast imagination.
Yep, I agree. I don't disagree. I think it would be great, a great system for that. Let's see. There's Scale by Steve Swink. That I don't know if it's ever going to come to Nintendo platforms, but either way, that one's looking really good. Lovers in Dangerous Space Time. I don't know if you've seen that.
Oh, sure.
Looking really good. God, there's a bunch.
Yeah, I know. You could just...
The problem for me is like I have so little time these days that I wind up like playing a bunch of games for like 10-15 minutes and be like, oh, this is really good. I can totally see all the potential in it. And then I just don't have time to finish games, and I feel really guilty. Like I'm still playing games from 2012 and 2013 now, and it's like, and I'm only getting further behind. So
I know when you're in a stage of life where you have the opportunity to actually do something to help video games get made, then when it's time to play them, you play them for long enough to get the idea, and then you feel selfish if you play any longer, because you could have done something more to help beyond that. That's certainly what happens to me. I still work at Destructoid largely because I'm just excited to be able to tell people about video game things. It's purely a passion thing for me, as is this show, which I'm so grateful that I get to keep doing. Matt Parker asks, is there any indie game that you've seen commercially flop which made you think, quote, dang it, I wish I had worked with them on that. We could have made fat stacks. What an excellent question, Matt Parker. Yeah, an indie game that if it had someone with business experience, with connections, with an understanding of how to market and whatnot, that you think could have done a lot better?
It's a tough one because, you know, I don't want to disparage anyone's business savvy, but one game that I think went largely unnoticed on WiiWare, I remember, was a game called Lit.
Way Forward.
And Way Forward is actually a pretty business savvy company, but I don't know, for whatever reason they didn't really market it. They just kind of put it out there, and it didn't do all that great, but it was really interesting and innovative in terms of the uses of the Wii Remote and like this mashup of like puzzle game and horror game, and yeah, so I really liked that game, and it just didn't go very far, and they made it all exclusive for the Wii, and didn't go anywhere.
I think I talked to Matt Bozon about that not that long ago.
Oh, really?
Maybe it was Matt, maybe it was Sean Velasco, but somebody told me that was originally part of the Mighty series. It was like Mighty Flip Champs, Mighty Switch Force, and then it was like Mighty Gonna Get Killed in the Classroom or something, something like that. People can still get that if you have a Wii or a Wii U. So the shop's still running. It is a really fun game. I think our own Colette Bennett reviewed it like in 2008 and gave it a very high score. Chris Chung, who's the developer of Cat Lateral Damage. Wonderful man. Very nice man. He asks, I have a question for Dan that I'm not sure if he can answer or not.
That's always a good preface. No comment.
Thanks to his politeness. As an indie developer, how much does it actually cost to develop for Wii U compared to other consoles? PS4, Xbone. You can't say Xbone anymore. It's offensive. It's like a slur. Gotta say Xbox One. People get very mad about it. Is it cheaper? Is it more expensive? Is it about the same to develop for Wii U, as far as you know?
It really depends on how you've architected the game. So if it's done in Unity, it's relatively simple and straightforward to port. It's not, like I said before, it's not as easy as just like saving as a Wii U version. So there is still some work, but it might be, you know, a few man-months, maybe 3 man-months to get that running and put all the different programming guidelines and all that stuff, the platform requirements in place. But if you've architected it in some way that is really designed for some other platform, then you might have to rebuild it from scratch. So 3DS, for example, has a very different architecture than everything else around it. So to make a game for 3DS, it actually is a lot easier if you make a game specifically for 3DS and then port it everywhere else than going the opposite direction.
Huh. Yeah, yeah, I've heard that actually from, I believe it was Jules Watcham at Renegade Kid. He
Yep,
starts at 3DS and then kind of expands from there. He's a really smart dude. I'm
he
excited about what
is.
he's doing.
He's a good
Let's
guy.
see. Yeah, absolutely. Adam Owen asks, were there any games in WiiWare eShop that were especially tricky to license? Were there any particularly tricky deals in terms of trying to get games on there?
Well, Grim Fandango was one. I kind of wanted like a remake for Grim Fandango. I mentioned before, and one of the reasons it never came to any other platforms until now was the rights issues were very complicated for Double Fine because it was owned by Lucas and then acquired by Disney, and so that was a rights issue. But I think rights issues usually are more about for Virtual Console. Because Virtual Console, it's really about these existing games that are out there and somebody granting Nintendo the license to, to work its magic and put the games back out there on Virtual Console.
Sure.
And so there were several games where we wanted them for Virtual Console, but back then nobody knew who owned the digital right. Nobody contemplated digital distribution rights, and so a lot of times a publisher would acquire the rights for what seemed like an eternity at the time, like 15 years, and then the rights would revert back to the developer. But usually by then the developer had gone out of business. And there was one, I think it was Spelunker or something.
Oh, sure.
Not Spelunky, but Spelunker, where it was a guy who was living. I wasn't directly involved in this, but he was living in a shack by a beach, somewhere totally out of the video game industry, for decades, and somebody found him and got him to sign this waiver thing, and so we dealt with the company that was able to acquire the rights from him. But going back and finding the rights for some of those games was pretty tricky.
Sure, sure. I've always heard rumor that someone owns the rights to making a Beetlejuice game, and he's just sitting on them. They're just in a safe, and he's got a job at a bank.
Sitting on a gold mine.
Yeah, I know, right? That could be.
I don't know.
A point-and-click Beetlejuice game?
Yeah.
I think a lot of point-and-click games would be. I think a point-and-click adaptation game. I think a point-and-click Arrested Development game. I'm always thinking like that. Speaking of which, I was. I will, but I was puzzled. I'm a big Monkey Island fan.
Yeah.
Those Monkey Island remasters didn't come to the Wii, even though I thought they would do fairly well on there. At least in my imagination, they would. All the other, the Telltale Monkey Island games did, and they ran into a lot of technical problems.
Yeah.
They were buggy, unfortunately, but the ones that were probably easy to run on the Wii, at least in my imagination, never came. Was that something that you pushed for, trying to get those on there, and did that fall through?
No, I didn't push so hard for those, especially because I was working with Telltale on their Monkey Island series, and some of the technical challenges they had was really they were outgrowing the platform basically. So in the early days of WiiWare, there was a pretty strict file size limit that you couldn't go beyond, and now those don't exist anymore. But back then it was, there was very limited storage space on the system, so we wanted to make sure that no one game would just eat up everyone's storage.
Sure.
And so it was very limited, and so they had a lot of voice, they had a lot of for all of their games, and so they really had to do everything they could just to squeeze it in and compress everything into that file size limit. And I think the game kind of suffered for it. Nowadays, I think it would be easy because those limits don't really exist.
Yeah. I remember talking with Tommy Reffinus about Super Meat Boy not coming to WiiWare as it was originally announced for, and it was about compression. They just didn't feel they could compress it. And I said, hopefully Tommy's okay with me telling the story. I'm like, how about now, Tommy? He's like, I will never click on the file for Super Meat Boy ever.
Yeah, I know.
Someone else can click on it. Somebody.
That's the thing. He won't let anyone else click on it. Because I've talked with him, and I said, just give it to somebody else. Have them, do it for you, and you just take a cut, and everyone will be happy. And he was like, nah.
No, it's a PTSD thing, I think, for him. That
Maybe.
was, yeah, that wrecked, and then totally made his life. What a life he's had, that Tommy.
He's an interesting guy. I really like Tommy and Shannon.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So the other question of like games I'm looking forward to, I should mention Mugenics.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, Team Meat back at it.
Yeah.
Jesse Bowell? I'm sorry, Jesse, I never get this right. Jesse actually won a copy of Mario Kart 8 from Nintendo, which
nice.
Krista from Nintendo gave them to me, and I gave them to Jesse. He won a contest. Asks, what do you think the biggest challenge Nintendo faces going into 2015?
I think going into 2015, it's really going to be about growing the Wii U install base. And then also keeping the 3DS momentum going, because the 3DS hardware is a little bit old. You can still make great games for it, but it's going to be harder and harder. Kind of like in the same way a lot of games were outgrowing the Wii. Games are starting to outgrow the 3DS. So making sure that console, that handheld stays vibrant. And then for Wii U, it's really going to be about executing really well on things like Smash Brothers and riding the momentum so that people, even if a lot of people will go out and buy a Wii U specifically for things like Smash Brothers, but then making sure that they stay and that the consoles don't collect dust and
Sure.
that there's already a ton of games out there that people haven't played because they didn't have a Wii U yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if I were a marketing guy at Nintendo, I'd say like, well, for all these new users, how do we get them to go back, in the catalog and see some of the games that they missed out in the first year or so? Because there's some great stuff out there.
Absolutely, yeah. I was really excited about the Wii U going into it, especially with all the Ubisoft support. And now I'm hearing Ubisoft is sitting on a game waiting for that install base.
Yeah.
You think a price drop, would that be smart, maybe after this holiday?
Price drops are always good, but I think it's more about just being the discount console's not really going to be the panacea for all the woes. I think it's really going to be about making sure that all of that first party content just lines up and they execute really well on that, and then filling in all the gaps either with third party publisher support or even better with indie game support. So I would say anyone who's interested in keeping the Wii U healthy should just frequent the eShop and buy lots of games from indie developers.
Sure. You know what I wish? Here's my Wii U system seller. When you go to the eShop and you press the A button, and there's a thing. If you win like 3 times, I should get like a penny. Because I would just boot it up every day just to do that.
Just to try. Yeah. I think that's a great idea. There's that distraction there. You're playing it, and then you get it, and you're like, so what happened? Nothing.
Yeah, and it wouldn't even have to be, a penny per win. It would be like if you win 3 times, and it'll probably be done loading by then. But just to make me feel like I was noticed and potentially given something would then cause me to associate the eShop with like endless potential all the time, which I tend to associate it with anyway. But you're right. When a system has collected dust for a while, it gains a stigma, and then people think, well, there's nothing on that because it's collecting dust, and therefore I won't play it, which causes it to collect more dust, which makes you think it's not a good system anymore. So keeping that momentum going is the way to keep people identifying that system as a worthwhile system. So yeah, my ideas. They never end, unfortunately. Two more questions we can do.
Sure.
Oh, geez, you are the best, Dan. Almost going for the full 2 hours. That's incredible.
Oh yeah, happy to do it.
You're so kind. Super
Kitty. We
Kitty.
talked about it for a while that I should be on this show, and yeah, this is finally I get the opportunity. So I'm excited.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you're, of course, welcome back anytime. Like I said, there's so much in that brain that we barely even touched upon, unfortunately. Super Kitty Pogo Dance asks, regarding the situation of just another game, I'm sorry, let me do that again. Regarding the situation of being just another game that gets thrown in the heap, what PR techniques would you recommend to an indie that will help them to stand out?
So probably one of the bigger things that a lot of indie developers miss out on is just staying in communication with the platforms. So there are some developers who would just, every once in a while, like if they achieve a new milestone or they've got, they've upgraded the art or something, that they would just send me like, here's a video of the latest, how the game's looking. Here's like a screenshot. Here's an update on like when our release timing is. Just kind of staying in touch, because there are a lot of times like I'll meet with a developer and they'll be really excited and they'll say, okay, great, I'm going to make my game. And then I don't hear from them for 2 years. And then, it's like, yeah, whatever happened to that game? And then it'll just show up in LawCheck, the certification process at the end. It's like, oh man, if I knew it was this close, I could have plugged it into different marketing initiatives and things like that. So just making sure that you're in constant contact with the platforms, because the platforms can do a lot to help you. Like, they've got their booths at Indiecade or at PAX or at E3, and if they can allocate some kiosk space for you, that's great. Or if they're doing like whatever videos that they do or blogging about your game, that kind of thing. So staying in touch not only with press, which I think a lot of people kind of know they're supposed to do, even though a lot of people just don't do it, but also staying in touch with the platforms as well is really important.
Relationship maintenance is what that sounds like.
Relationships go a long way. It's yeah.
And with you, the way you described your former job, it was all about so many different agendas and so many different priorities that if you stay quiet and humble, which is always nice to be humble, but it's also nice to be humble and also be heard, to say, hey, remember me, Dan? I'm working on the thing. Then they can take a little bit more mind space for you as you're juggling so many different balls at the same time.
Absolutely. There are so many times when the first time I really find out about a game is like someone in the LawCheck team will call me up and say, did you see this one game? It's actually really good. And I'll say, well, I haven't even seen it yet. And it'll turn out to be this amazing game. And I'll be like, why didn't they call me and let me know and just kind of give me a heads up? And so yeah,
for
so
their
that's
own sake, for them, not because you felt left out, but because like I could have helped, And
then again, there are other people on the other extreme. So I just want to make sure, there are some people who just ping me a little bit too often, and so kind of striking that balance of like, all right, it's enough. I get it. You're really excited about your game. I've got other people I also have to help. So
sure.
So, being sensitive to people's time is definitely important, but being heard is not unreasonable.
Right. Lee Davidson asks, do you have any extra insights to why some games struggle to come out in Europe through Nintendo's digital stores? We're still waiting for 1001 Spikes and Shovel Knight. I don't know if 1001 Spikes released on PlayStation and Xbox One in Europe or not. I know that part of it is just the PEGI system is much more expensive and much more strenuous, but is there anything specific about Nintendo consoles that's made it harder?
Well, there is PEGI and also USK, the German age rating system, and so both of those add some things. There's also, I don't think 1001 Spikes was impacted by this, but there are some government regulations about kind of famously, it used to be the case that you couldn't show red blood in your game in Germany, I think. And so a lot of people had to redo their art specifically for the German market, and if it wasn't that big an opportunity, they would just skip all of Europe or just say, release my game in Europe except for in Germany. There's also localization, some other things. But one thing that I think is something that Nintendo needs to work on, and I kind of regret that this is part of what I left behind as unfinished. But when WiiWare first started out, I put together the process for NOA, and I shared that with NOE, and I said, all right, let's see if we can, at least from an outside perspective, it should look like one unified process. You go in through this one gateway, and you go through all these steps, and just at the very end, you have to go through the certification process in both regions. And that was unfortunately something that we were that was like a given. There wasn't like one worldwide unified system for it, so it's 3 separate processes: NOA, NOE, and NCL. But I said, let's see what we could do to minimize that from the developer's perspective, so it all looks like one process until you get to the very end. And then over time, so that worked out well at first, but then over time, NOE started, they would have their reorgs, they would do things differently. We changed our processes here and there in different ways, and so they both grew kind of organically, but in a lot of ways in like diverging directions. And so, and that was really frustrating for developers because they had one game, it's done, it works on Wii U or 3DS or whatever, but they have to go through, fill out different forms in each region, and they have to go through different processes in both regions, and that's something that I regret that we didn't fix, and I know people are working on fixing that, but it really should be, it's not that one system was better or required in one market and had to be different, it was just decisions were made independently. And so when you look at the market size, NOA versus NOE, NOA is the bigger market, so people start there, and then they see how it does, and then they later think about doing the NOE version. And
Sure.
If somebody wants to spend a lot of extra time localizing for all the different languages in Europe, then that also adds some time as well.
Right. And before I forget to ask, did you have anything to do with the initiative allowing developers and publishers to suddenly put their games on sale on the eShop? Because that was a huge thing.
Yeah, that was a huge thing. Yeah, so that had been in the works for a while. It was kind of an all or nothing decision. Like there was like either we control the price, and we kind of decided in the WiiWare days, we set the price, and we're never going to change it. So legally, my understanding is that either somebody has to be in charge of pricing, either the platform or the developer. You can't have it like sometimes we do, sometimes they do. So either if we were going to set the price, basically the way it worked internally is that we would never change the price. And that seemed a little silly to me. I thought, we could, that's, another tool in the marketer's toolkit is like, what do you put on sale? What do you, but a lot of times people just said, what, we don't have for whatever reason, we're not going to change the price. So let's put the decision back on the developers and say that they can set their price however they want, they can change it. And so that's the direction that the whole organization moved. And I think a lot of that actually was driven by a lot of the publishers, because we want to start releasing retail games digitally. And a lot of the publishers were like, well, if I've got my game on sale across all the channels, I've got to be able to put my game on sale on the eShop as well. And so I think the decision was just made, all right, let's give up control of that and make it so that developers completely control their own destiny.
So the influence of big publishers helps small developers.
It did.
How interesting.
Absolutely.
So many different aspects to this. Man, it's such a multifaceted, three-dimensional sphere, an orb. You're constantly gazing at the orb.
Well, when you think about it, like in a post-retail, physical media world, there's no longer this dichotomy of like either you're indie or you're a big publisher. It's going to be more like a spectrum. Like there's going to be really big budget games, really small budget games with like one person, and then there's like where's Telltale in there? Telltale's like kind of in the middle. They're like, I forget how many people they are. I want to say like 200, but I could be totally off base on that. But they're not as big as EA. But and then there's everyone in between. So I think this like distinction between publishers versus developers is kind of going to melt away a little bit.
Sure. And most kids I know have no idea that Minecraft is indie. They're just like, it's awesome. Like these labels don't mean a lot to the consumer a lot of the time. So, and then Debbie Ever had one last one. We can do it. We have 1 minute. What is the relationship between Nintendo of America and Nintendo of Japan in regards to what games are released and distributed? Sorry, I said that so quickly. I don't know if you caught it. Speaking of politics, I was shocked, still mind blown, that time that Reggie said, "Oh yeah, that Disaster Day of Crisis game, that looks kind of crappy. We're not bringing that out here." I was like, you just totally screwed Nintendo of Europe. They're actually trying to sell that. You don't say that. But he totally said that, and I actually imported that game because it's hilarious. But yeah, these decisions, was it Reggie's decision to not bring Disaster Day of Crisis out here, or was it more Nintendo of Japan's, from what you know?
Well, so for I can't speak to any one situation, but if it's a Nintendo published game, like if it's developed in Japan and then released in NOA, NOA the process is NOA evaluates it, sees how appropriate it is for our local market, figures out what the cost would be to do a decent job localizing it. So games that are very cultural or have a lot of text or something like that, that's a bigger investment to bring over. And so sometimes the decision is made not to make that investment to bring the game over because of those costs. So
that's Nintendo of America making that decision?
So Nintendo of America might just say, you know what, this didn't happen, but they might say, you know what, we don't want the next Zelda because it's going to cost so much to localize. So yeah, we're going to pass.
And they can say that, and Nintendo of Japan has to say, okay, yeah, I guess you don't want it. Really?
I think the conversation would be a little bit more involved than that, but yeah. But I believe it is within NOA's rights to do that, to be able to say, like, this won't make money for us, and and then obviously it'll be a conversation. Zelda, it would be insane to have that conversation, right. But for more smaller niche things. But as it relates to third parties, Nintendo Japan doesn't have any say into what third-party games are released on our system locally.
Right. Sure. So, but just so I'm hearing this right, in your opinion, from what you know, if Iwata, president of Nintendo, said we should bring Mother 3 out on the Virtual Console on the Wii U, which now runs GBA games, and Iwata worked, he programmed Earthbound, as far as I know, so that's kind of his labor of love. Reggie could say, no, Iwata, we're not doing it? Really?
Well, one change that happened, I don't know if you followed this in the news, but Mr. Iwata is now CEO of Nintendo of America as well. So he...
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry.
He would have to convince himself, basically. So I think he would be able to... and either way, even under the old system, when... there's a different guy, his name, Mr. Kimishima, was the CEO. Still, I think there would be a discussion, and it would be a career-ending exercise for all involved if, like, they went to World War III over, like, we don't want to bring this game over. There would be an explanation. Here's why we don't think it's going to pan out. Here's, it's a very dedicated audience, but very, very narrow and very niche, and we don't think we'll be able to sell enough copies. And if they can make the argument and explain their rationale, Japan still could say, we understand that, but we really want to see if we can make this happen. And you can have those conversations.
Sure. I still hold out hope for Mother 3. I know it's probably goofy of me, but Nintendo just released a NES game, a Famicom game. It's 26 years old on the 3DS Virtual Console. I believe it's called Legend of Murasama's Castle, something like that. So if that can happen, then maybe I'll get Mother 3 in like 30 years. You never know.
Yeah, well, keep waiting. I don't know.
Well, Dan, we're out of time. Is there anything else that you wished we had talked about that we missed? Anything you want to spit out before we go?
Well, I'll be at PAX Dev, and I'll be talking about kind of the new thing that I'm going to be working on, as well as some business tips for indies. So if anyone's watching this who's a developer and is going to be at PAX Dev, it'd be great to meet up there. And any developers who want some advice on the business stuff, I'm way behind on email right now, so I apologize for slow responses, but happy to talk to anybody.
Awesome. And on Twitter, you're still Dan Adelman?
I am. Yes. And I'm allowed to tweet now. So
during the no tweet phase, I fantasized about being you, as I do anyway, because what an awesome life you're having. And I thought
okay.
I would probably have started a Twitter account called Dan Adelman. So if I could get away with it, be like, I might work at Nintendo.
Yeah.
You want to talk to me? It would have been a little. I would have been fired. Let's face it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they can follow you, Dan_Adelman,
Yeah.
on Twitter, and you've got your own .com.
Yep. Right now, there's just one blog post on it, and a little bit more of a description of what my new thing is going to be all about. But over time, I'm going to be, once I have more time, I'll write some more, blog entries about my thoughts about like what's going on in the industry, business tips for indie developers, that kind of thing. Right now, I'm just worried about clearing out my inbox because I've still got like over 100 unread emails, so I got to get
famous. Back. That's what happens to famous people. Pretty exciting. And very nice artwork on your website, by the way. Who was that done by?
Yeah, that was done by Kyle Pulver. I'm glad you mentioned that. So Kyle made Offspring Fling. He also made a game called Snapshot. Both are available on Steam, and he's just a general all-around good guy. So buy his games.
Yeah, Kyle's. Does he live in the indie house? I think he does.
There are two indie houses. There's one in Vancouver, and then there's one in where they live, like Arizona or some godforsaken place like that. It's him and his girlfriend Corey and Steve Swink and Aaron Robinson all live together in that house. So.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Indie house. Maybe you'll have an indie house someday. I want you to be the dad of my indie house. My indie house dad, please.
My wife might not like that.
My wife might. We've got cats and dogs and stuff. We can have our own house. As for me, I'm at TronNox on Twitter. This show can be watched again later on YouTube, youtube.com/SupHolmesShow. Like one word. You can listen to it later on iTunes and Libsyn. Thanks so much, everybody, and thank you, Dan. Oh, jeez. Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care. Oh, but don't leave. Just wait for...